Dear Taurus, have you ever sat quietly in a familiar room surrounded by familiar faces, familiar conversations, and still felt like no one really knew what was going on inside your mind? Taurus often moves through life this way. Not loudly, not in a rush to explain, just quietly observing, holding a rhythm of their own slightly slower than the world outside. From the outside it looks calm, steady, almost still. But inside, nothing is empty. Not every feeling needs to be spoken right away. Not every thought needs a name. It's strange that very silence can spark curiosity. And it's that same silence that often makes Taurus seem hard to understand. If you've ever been asked, "So what are you really thinking?" or found yourself wondering why you always feel a little out of sync with everything around you, maybe this story will reach you in a quiet, personal way. Let's begin with that silence, the place that feels still at first, yet is gently opening to something just beginning to unfold. The quiet of Taurus isn't the same as absence. It's more like a calm room late at night, the warm yellow light still on, the curtains gently drawn. From the outside, people pass by and assume there's nothing happening in there. But inside, everything is still alive, just moving to a rhythm, all its own. Spend enough time observing Taurus, and it becomes clear they aren't silent because they have nothing to say. Their silence comes from needing time to fully feel what just happened. Like standing at the edge of a long road after the rain, the pavement still wet, no one rushing them to step forward. They pause their watching, listening, making sure the next step won't pull them away from who they are. People used to fast-paced living often grow uneasy with that slowness. A question hangs quietly in the air: why aren't they reacting? But for Taurus, a reaction doesn't always need to happen right away. Some feelings need to be set down first, turned gently in the palm of the hand, seen under different light before they're ready to be named. That silence is like a small flame, carefully shielded. It doesn't flare up. It doesn't perform. It burns steadily, warmly, just enough to keep the inner space from growing cold. From a distance, though, that light is easy to miss. There was a moment once, sitting beside a Taurus in a familiar cafe. The soft clink of a spoon against a cup, again and again. Around us, voices overlapped, laughter filled the room. They were simply looking out the window, watching traffic drift slowly beneath the evening lights. That moment wasn't empty at all. It was full of thoughts not yet spoken, of feelings that didn't need to be shared. Strangely enough, that kind of silence invites assumptions. People attach meanings to it: cold, distant, hard to approach. Few consider that it might be a form of respect. Respect for one's own emotions. Respect for another person's space. Not stepping into a conversation just to fill the quiet. Taurus tends to believe that not every silence needs to be broken. A quiet room doesn't always need music. A long evening doesn't need every thought spoken aloud. Silence, for them, is where emotions get to rest, like setting your shoes down after a long day of walking. From the outside, it can feel confusing not to read Taurus right away. But if you're willing to stay to accept that slower pace, you begin to notice the subtleties. A gaze that lingers a little longer than usual. A short sentence, offered at just the right moment. A response that arrives late, but carries a depth that rushed reactions rarely hold. That quiet is also how Taurus protects themselves. They don't fling the doors open to every feeling all at once. They don't let the outside world disrupt too quickly what's still being arranged within. Like a house with a wide front porch, where guests wait a moment before being invited in, not because they aren't welcome, but because the host wants to be sure the inside stays warm. And when that door finally opens, it usually happens naturally. No announcement, no drama, just the right moment. That's when it becomes clear the silence at the beginning was never emptiness. It was the foundation, the steady ground, that allows everything that follows to stand a little more firmly. From that quiet place, the story truly begins. When you spend enough time close to Taurus, something else slowly begins to reveal itself, very softly, very gradually. On the surface, they're like a still lake in the early morning. The wind hasn't risen yet. Everything looks steady, even uneventful. It's easy to pass by and assume nothing is really moving there. But that lake is never truly still. The ripples simply live deeper, beneath the surface where the eye rarely lingers. Taurus carries a rhythm of breath that's entirely their own. Not rushed. Not forced. That rhythm follows them down the street, into quiet rooms, into those moments when late-night light spills across a table. Inside, thoughts are always flowing. They don't collide loudly. They line up, patiently, waiting their turn to be fully felt. Some thoughts travel far, then return, bringing back a weight or a lightness that's hard to name. Most people are used to speaking the moment a thought appears. Taurus moves differently. They let the thought stay, like a letter kept in a coat pocket, unopened for now. Not out of fear of sharing, but out of care, making sure the feeling has settled enough not to bruise themselves or the person listening. Some words, spoken too early, lose their shape. Taurus seems to understand that instinctively. That calm exterior is often misunderstood. People assume Taurus doesn't think much, or that they're too comfortable with where they are. But sit beside them during a long afternoon when sunlight tilts lower and the noise outside begins to slow, and you'll notice a very quiet, very long breath. The breath of questions that don't need answers yet. Of silent weighing what has already passed, and what might still be on its way. Taurus doesn't like letting emotions spill out while they're still tangled. They're like someone tending a small fire, adding wood slowly, adjusting the distance, so the flame burns steady. They don't want it flaring up, only to burn out too fast. The stability others see is built from countless inner adjustments, small, invisible ones. There are late nights when the world finally quiets down, and Taurus faces their thoughts honestly. A dark room. A bedside lamp, just bright enough to recognize familiar objects. In that space, they allow themselves to think deeper, to feel more, without having to hold stillness for anyone else. By morning, they step back out carrying that familiar calm, as if nothing happened the night before. To others, that slowness can be hard to read. But for Taurus, it's how balance is kept. Like walking a long road, not running, not stopping abruptly, just moving steadily so they don't lose their footing. Every step is considered. Every decision passes through a layer of emotion that's already been gently arranged. Inside Taurus, there are long breaths that have never been spoken aloud. Not because they're too heavy, but because they need space. They need time. They need that original silence to exist without being distorted. Once this is understood, the calm on the surface no longer feels confusing. It starts to feel like a sign of depth. And from there, the next layers of the story begin to unfold slowly, like light spreading across a room as morning quietly arrives. And when that light becomes clear enough, people begin to notice Taurus standing for a long time at life's crossroads. Not in confusion, not because there are no options. It's the stillness of someone listening inward, between paths that look similar on the surface, but feel very different inside. On the outside, time seems to move faster than their steps. On the inside, everything needs to be set in the right place before anything can move. Moments like this appear in very ordinary life. A new job being offered. A relationship waiting for an answer. A decision that seems small, yet quietly pulls many changes behind it. Taurus doesn't rush to say yes. They don't turn away immediately either. They stand there, like someone pausing at an intersection while the light is still green, not because they missed the signal, but because they want to be sure they're heading in the right direction. That steadiness is often misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like someone refusing to move. Comments surface, sometimes gentle, sometimes heavier, slow, stubborn, unyielding. Few notice that behind that quiet posture is a very serious inner conversation. Not a search for excuses to say no, but a search for inner agreement. Taurus needs certainty in a way that's uniquely their own. Not certainty that the choice is right for everyone, just that it fits the rhythm they're protecting. Like choosing shoes for a long walk. They don't have to be the most beautiful. They just have to fit. They know that walking in resistance makes every step afterward feel heavier. There were times Taurus tried moving at someone else's pace, saying yes before they were truly ready, stepping onto a new path simply because everyone around them was doing the same. Those experiences taught them their limits. They learned that rushing doesn't bring safety. They learned that ignoring the inner voice comes with a cost. Taurus determination isn't loud. It's not the kind that slams tables or defends opinions at all costs. It's more like a stone resting by the roadside enduring sun and rain, without needing to prove it exists. Once a decision is made, they move with solid footing. They don't change direction constantly. They don't look back too often. But to reach that step, they need time to stand still at the crossing. Others may grow impatient beside them. Time passes. The world keeps moving. And Taurus remains there, as if waiting for a signal only they can recognize. When it arrives, it's usually very quiet. A light feeling in the chest. A thought that suddenly settles into clarity. No noise, no drama. Just enough to know it's time to move forward. From a distance, that slowness can seem hard to understand. Up close, it's how Taurus avoids hurting themselves. How they avoid choices that force them to turn back too soon. How they protect the sense of stability they've carefully built. Standing at a crossroads, Taurus isn't searching for the perfect path. They're searching for one they can walk for a long time. And sometimes, the simple act of waiting patiently until the heart gives its quiet consent is a very silent form of courage. After standing still at those crossroads so many times, Taurus becomes even more careful about what and who is allowed into their inner space. Their heart isn't cold at all. It's more like a small room with a warm yellow lamp always on. Not bright, not showy, just warm enough that anyone who stays can feel at ease. It's just that the door to that room doesn't open for everyone at the same time. Some people are used to sharing everything from the very first meeting. Taurus doesn't move at that pace. They need time to sense what someone's presence brings with it. Is it light, or does it feel heavy? Is it safe, or does it quietly unsettle the heart? They listen not only to words, but to the silences between them, to the smallest reactions most people overlook. That kind of selectiveness is easy to misunderstand. From the outside, Taurus can look distant, guarded, overly cautious. Few notice that this is how they protect the warmth inside. So the small flame doesn't get blown out too early. So the lit room isn't disturbed by unfamiliar footsteps. Taurus has learned that not everyone who enters knows how to stay. There were moments when they opened the door a little too soon, only to quietly gather the pieces of emotion left behind. Those experiences didn't make them shut the door completely. They just added a thin curtain. Enough to see, enough to feel, before deciding whether to open the door wider. In close relationships, Taurus isn't the one for grand words. Their warmth shows up in very ordinary ways. A steady presence, a nod at the right moment, a silence that doesn't demand anything. They're there not loud, not promising, but deeply real. And to receive that kind of presence, patience is needed. The same patience Taurus practices with themselves. That yellow lit room doesn't need to be full. Just a few people inside who know how to stay quiet, who know how to respect the space. When Taurus feels safe, they open up naturally. No dramatic moment, no big declaration. Just one day, the conversation goes deeper. A gaze lingers a little longer, and the distance slowly fades without anyone needing to name it. From the outside, it can feel hard to reach them, standing before a door that hasn't opened yet. But once you cross that threshold, you realize the warmth isn't hesitant at all. It doesn't flare up. It spreads gently, like heat sinking through layers of clothing on a cool evening. And from that carefully guarded warmth, deeper emotions finally find a place to settle. When there's finally space to be still, the emotions inside Taurus begin to show themselves more clearly, not in a rush, without needing any noise. They're like underground water, moving beneath the surface, quiet, steady, enduring. Some days, Taurus looks completely ordinary, working, talking, smiling at the right moments. Few notice that inside, a feeling has just passed through, leaving a lingering echo, like the glow of a late-night lamp still resting on a table after everyone else has gone home. Taurus isn't used to reacting the moment an emotion arrives. When joy comes, they hold it, letting themselves feel it fully. When sadness appears, they set it down gently, look at it closely, try to understand where it came from. The way they handle emotion isn't loud, it isn't sudden. There's no need to raise their voice to be heard. No need to exaggerate feeling to be seen. For Taurus, emotion is something to be understood before it's shared. There are moments standing in the middle of a crowd, voices overlapping, laughter filling the air, when Taurus feels a very private quiet open up inside. Not because they've pulled away from others, but because the feeling itself needs room to settle. Like a small flame, if the wind blows too hard, it flickers, loses balance. So Taurus shields it, lets it burn evenly, not allowing it to be blown out by reactions that come too fast. Others sometimes wait for something clearer, an immediate answer, a visible emotional response. But Taurus often arrives one beat later, not from lack of care, but from asking inwardly, what does this feeling really mean? Does it need to be spoken? Should it be held a little longer? And if it's shared, how can it be said without making everything heavier? There are long evenings when the city finally quiets down, and Taurus lets emotion move freely. A dim light in a silent room, the soft ticking of a clock. In that space, they allow themselves to feel more, replaying a sentence, a glance, a moment that seems small, yet stays much longer than expected. The feeling isn't forced into words. It only needs to be acknowledged to be allowed to exist. The depth of Taurus emotion doesn't seek attention. It shows up in how they listen, in the way they remember details others forget, in the choice to stay even when they don't know what the perfect words would be. Sometimes, that quiet presence is the most solid thing they can offer. People have wondered why Taurus doesn't say much when emotions run high. But to Taurus, emotion isn't something to display. It's something to tend. Like a small garden behind the house, not everyone needs to see it. It just needs regular care. And in time, it grows green on its own. Holding emotion back doesn't mean suppressing it. It's another form of patience. Patience with themselves, with feelings that haven't fully taken shape yet. Taurus knows that spoken too early, emotion can be misunderstood. Held a little longer, it becomes clearer, closer to what it truly is. And when Taurus does choose to share, it's usually very real. Not many words. No embellishment. Just a feeling that's ripened enough to be placed before someone else without fear of being distorted. Those moments are rare, but deep. Like a small flame finally strong enough to warm an entire room. In a world so familiar with noise, Taurus chooses to feel quietly. Not to be different, but to avoid losing themselves in rushed reactions. And it's that very quiet that allows their emotions, even without making a sound, to stay for a long time in the hearts of those who truly know how to listen. Perhaps it's because their emotions are cared for this way that the things which once touched Taurus rarely disappear completely. They're placed on a very private shelf of memory, not displayed, not covered in dust, just quietly there. Each memory is like a familiar object in an old house. You don't need to touch it every day. Just knowing it's still there is enough to bring a sense of safety when you think of it. Taurus doesn't have the habit of cutting off the past like severing a rope. They walk alongside it. They carry it with them the way the scent of old wood lingers inside a box that's been kept for years. Not to live there forever, but because the past was once where they learned how to feel, how to stand their ground. What has passed, whether joyful or painful, leaves marks that are very real. On slow afternoons, when sunlight tilts gently through a window, Taurus might suddenly remember something very small. A road walked many times, an old room with familiar yellow light, a conversation that never quite finished. Memory doesn't arrive loudly. It comes like a familiar guest sits for a while, then quietly leaves again as evening falls. From the outside, this is sometimes misunderstood. People think Taurus is stuck, hesitant, still holding on. But in truth, they're simply placing the past where it belongs. Not hiding it, not exaggerating it. Just allowing it to exist as part of their inner home, kept tidy, not discarded carelessly. That attachment comes from the way Taurus honors what once mattered. A relationship, even after it changes, is remembered with kindness. A difficult chapter, even once it's over, is looked back on with understanding. Taurus rarely denies what was once important. They sense that every experience has shaped who they are now. Sometimes, this very respect for the past makes others feel that Taurus isn't ready to move forward. They see the remembering. They notice the silence when an old memory is mentioned, and they rush to conclude that Taurus is looking backward. But remembering doesn't mean returning. For Taurus, remembering is simply a way of confirming that the road they walked was real. The past, to them, is like books lined neatly on a shelf. Not every book is reopened. But when needed, they know they can take one down, read a few pages, and place it back where it belongs. Those books don't block the path ahead. They only remind Taurus where they've been and what they've learned. Because of this way of seeing, Taurus steps into the present with a steadiness that's uniquely their own. They don't deny what's behind them. They don't let it pull them backward either. They carry memory the way one carries experience, not as a burden, but as quiet knowledge. And when they're ready, they still move forward. They just don't rush to erase the old footprints along the way. In a world accustomed to constant reinvention, Taurus chooses to keep what once held meaning, like preserving the soft light of late afternoon inside a quiet room. Not dazzling, but gentle enough to clearly illuminate the path now opening ahead. And along that road, Taurus walks with a very different rhythm. Not because they don't hear the pressure around them, but because they choose not to let that noise decide their pace. The world outside is used to moving fast, keeping up, reacting immediately. Taurus moves slowly, as if every step needs to touch the ground firmly before the next one is lifted. That rhythm can make others restless. People run. Taurus walks. People talk non-stop. Taurus listens. They're not standing outside of life. They're simply living it in a quieter way. There are mornings that begin very early, with just enough light to see the road ahead. Taurus doesn't rush forward. They pause to feel the air, to hear the city waking up, and only then do they step outside. Slowness, for Taurus, isn't the same as delay. It's how they avoid being swept away. In the fast current of news, plans, and expectations, they choose carefully what they allow inside. Not everything new needs to be tried. Not every invitation needs an answer. That slower pace helps them tell the difference between what truly matters and what's only noise. There are moments standing at a crowded intersection, horns sounding, people rushing past, traffic lights changing again and again. Taurus pauses for one extra beat, watching the flow move around them. That moment doesn't feel isolating. It feels like a breath saved in the middle of a long day. Because of that pause, when they move again, they know where they're going, not just moving to avoid being left behind. Others may find that rhythm hard to follow. They're used to things happening quickly, clearly, decisively. Taurus lets things unfold slowly, slow enough to notice small shifts. A relationship isn't rushed into a label. A decision isn't sealed too soon. They sense that if they move slowly enough, what doesn't belong will fall away on its own, without force. That slow rhythm is also how Taurus doesn't lose themselves. Between overlapping expectations and constantly changing standards, they keep an inner space where no one can rush them. There, they check in with their emotions, their thoughts, even their tiredness. It isn't always easy, but it's necessary to avoid being pulled into what was never truly theirs. There are evenings when the city is still glowing, and Taurus has already withdrawn into a quiet room. Soft light. Distant traffic. Everything slowed enough to feel their own presence again. That slower life doesn't leave them behind. It keeps them connected to themselves in a world that's always trying to break that rhythm. From the outside, Taurus can seem hard to understand. Out of sync. Not keeping up. But look a little closer, and you'll see they're walking a very clear path. It just doesn't follow the familiar trail. Each step carries certainty. Not loud, but steady. And sometimes that slower rhythm is exactly what allows Taurus to travel farther without ever needing to run. When you look back at all those silences, those unhurried steps, those emotions so carefully held, the sense of Taurus being hard to understand begins to soften. Not because everything suddenly makes sense, but because you realize that not every way of living needs an explanation. Some people choose to stay still long enough to understand themselves first, before allowing the world to understand them. Taurus isn't a puzzle waiting to be solved. They're more like a long afternoon light that isn't harsh, that doesn't rush to fade, just quietly present. Someone passing by might see nothing unusual, but anyone who pauses for a moment can feel a comfort that's difficult to name. That sense of being hard to understand may come from the fact that Taurus doesn't live by familiar patterns of speed and display. Some people speak in order to be seen. Taurus chooses to live in order to feel. They don't try to impress. They don't push themselves into the spotlight. Their sincerity lives in small things, in staying when everything grows quiet, in not turning away when emotions still need time. Because these things aren't loud, they're easy to overlook. If you've ever felt out of rhythm with the world around you, if you've ever been asked why you move so slowly, why you don't say more, perhaps there's something in this story that feels quietly familiar. Not to decide where you belong, but to see that a slower, more careful, deeper way of living is also a choice worthy of respect. Everyone moves at a different pace. Some run. Some walk. Some stand still for a long time before taking the next step. Taurus is simply following the rhythm that helps them hold on to what matters most. And maybe, in some quiet moment of your own, you've chosen to slow down too, even if only for a few seconds. The story rests here, not to offer a conclusion, but to leave behind a gentle space. A space just wide enough to wonder in a world that's always urging you forward. What is your own pace, and does it need a little more listening right now?